And I started looking at this picture right here, which is a picture of the side door of the van. And I zoomed in on it, because this is the zoomed in picture that our expert Joe Slemko made. And you can clearly see that the blood stain pattern, that this is the point of impact, that the bullet had to come from like the driver's side door area. And I just realized it's the second day of trial. And I freaking panicked because I'm like, what the fuck? I had this tunnel vision that the whole time that this case was self-defense. I never put together that Reginald didn't actually fire the bullet that killed Mark Edwards. This is the support beam. It's at a right angle. It's behind the seat. There's no blood on the seat where Mark Edwards was sitting. And so there's no way these blood drips. Exactly. Thank you very much for the demonstrative.
Careful.
But there's no way these spots could have got there if, in fact, the bullet had come from the back of the van. And I realized this, and I start to panic. And at that time, I called Reginald because I zoomed in on my laptop, and I'm like, oh my god. And I called Reginald that night. I go, Reg, I got some good news, and I got some bad news. What do you want first? He goes, give me the bad news first. I go, no, I'm going to give you the good news first. I said,
always start with the good news.
The good news is you didn't kill anybody, because I know it's been weighing on his conscience for 8 months at this time. He goes, what's the bad news? I go, I haven't figured it out till right now. I'm not sure what the fuck we're going to do about it. So what we did, though, is Sarah took the pictures, like the relevant pictures, like this picture, and the picture of the bullet hole from the back of the van, which you can clearly see is right there. But I didn't realize that at the time that was the bullet hole from the back of the van. But see, that's where the bullet impacted the window. And we sent those pictures in the coroner's report to like several experts around the country and around the world. And every expert I talked to was like, oh, I need $2,000 before I can even review the case. I'm like, you need $2,000? I'm like, this is a pro bono case. I got no fucking money. Just to give me an opinion, you can't look at this and tell me with any certainty. I mean, you're an expert. You can look at this picture and be like, I know what that is. It shows shit. But then, after we finished trial on the 21st of December, we got out early around 11 or 12, and I got this email from a guy named Joe Slemko, who I didn't even recognize it, but then I looked at it later on around 4:30, 5 o'clock, because I went through him again, because I thought it was an expert I already talked to. But Joe Slemko wasn't somebody I'd already talked to. Joe Slemko is a police officer from Edmonton, Alberta. And actually, I had learned about bloodstain pattern analysis because he has a slideshow presentation of understanding bloodstain patterns on his website. And he calls and he shoots me an email. He's like, Dan, you're right. There's no way the bullet that came from the back window could have in fact killed Mark Edwards. And so I get him on the phone because he's at work, because he's a police officer. And I'm like, Joe, is there any way you can get me a report? And he's like, dude, I'm at work. I don't know if I can get it. I'm like, Joe, it's an emergency, because we got to file this emergency motion tomorrow to amend our witness list. He's like, okay, I'll get you one. This guy went home and sent me the most detailed report, 5 pages long. And I looked at his website and all his criteria. This guy's testified before the Supreme Court of England,
That's the best part.
Supreme Court of Western Australia. There was a death in Thailand with the royal family, and he investigated for the Royal Thai Police. I mean, this guy has testified around the world on bloodstain pattern analysis, but mostly for the prosecution. He's only testified for the defense 5 times his entire career. I'm like, Joe, is there any way that you can be here in January? And he's like, well, I don't much like coming to Detroit in January. It's cold there. I'm like, Joe, this is a matter of life and death. And he's like, I'll be there. You let me go. And so I filed this motion, but the prosecutor would not accept the motion. We tried to hand deliver it to the prosecutor's office. They would not. They were like, no, Brad, because in Wayne County, you cannot file a motion unless the prosecutor signs off on it. So we tried to hand deliver it. They would not take it. Wow. We FedExed it to him. They would to Kim Worthy. I thought if Kim Worthy knew what was going on, she would do something. She would not sign for it. They'd send it back, and I had to pay for it.
Oh, that's a bunch of
we sent it to Detective Hampton certified mail, so he had a copy of it. We did everything we could. Then the next day, Holly goes down there and tries to serve it to him. They will not accept it. So we finally get it to them, like, we like faxed it to him like after that, and we get there on court, and the whole time we're on break, I can't relax because I didn't take the case with me. I was like trying to relax 2 weeks. But all I can think is this judge has screwed me every which way. He ain't never gonna let this in. And so we get to court that day, and but I give him this detailed report. And he says to the prosecutor, well, do you have an objection? The prosecutor goes, oh, I have an objection. I didn't get the report till just now. I'm like, I tried to serve it to you. But see, the judge knew we tried to serve it to him. Because 2 people at Ida had tried to serve it to him, and Holly tried to serve it to him. And he says to the prosecutor, well, do you have an objection? He goes, of course I have an objection. He goes, well, I don't even know if this guy's qualified. I'm thinking, you don't know if this guy's qualified? He's a world-class expert who's a fucking police officer. And the judge is like, well, bring him here, and we'll see if he's qualified. I'm like, great. So I call Joe. I'm like, Joe, but I still have to be able to buy a plane ticket ahead of time, because a plane ticket from Edmonton, Alberta to Detroit, Michigan is like $1,000 if you buy in advance. So I bought it like 5 days in advance. It cost me $1,150, and I couldn't even believe it. There's some video on the camera when Joe Slemko finally arrived. I'm like freaking out because the prosecutor was like, oh, I object. And I gave him the report so he could like, because I wanted him to have it, because I thought when he saw the truth, he would stop this fucking malicious prosecution. But he doesn't. And Joe Slemko shows up on Sunday night at like 9:30, and I feel like it is Jesus Christ himself that walked off that plane. Because I'm like, Joe Slemko, running around the freaking airport with my video camera. And like, I missed him because he came in the wrong door. And then Bill's like, he's out here. And I come up like, Joe Slemko, you have saved us. And so we went to my office and prepared the presentation that we were going to give the jury the next day. And during the presentation, I said to Joe, just, you know, on a side note, I said, Joe, honestly, if some poor black man from Pontiac goes to prison for the rest of his life, what's the difference to you? And he said to me, Dan, if I didn't know about it, it wouldn't make any difference to me. But now that I know, to close my eyes and pretend that I didn't, I couldn't live with myself. And I was like, I know where you're coming from, Joe. The cross-examination by the prosecutor was like, is this expectorant blood? And Joe was like, what? Because expectorant blood is blood that's in the lungs and spit out. Well, if you're an expert, you clearly know what expectorant blood is because you see bubbles in it, you see saliva lines, you see all this stuff in it. And plus there has to be an injury to the lungs. And if you check the autopsy report and there's no blood in the lungs, you know it couldn't have been expectorant blood. And then the prosecutor's like, did you test on the alternative hypothesis? And he's like, well, perhaps he was laying down. And the prosecutor goes, how about hanging from the ceiling? And Joe's like, well, I didn't really test that one. I mean, I don't know, is that possible? He's like, you didn't look at that incarceration, did you? And so he's asking him all these stupid fucking questions. And it was so funny because he was like the greatest expert, the most, I mean, because this guy has a reputation that is beyond words. And so my closing argument, it was so funny because we went over the closing argument for days preparing it. To get it down to an hour, because that's all the judge would give me was an hour. So, you know, all these boards that you see around the house, like in the front, we had this like amazing presentation put together. And I'm done. And the judge's like, you got 5 minutes left. I'm like, I'm done. But then all of a sudden, I remember I had this picture of Jerry Spence in my binder and the story about Bill. And I go, really, I got 5 minutes? I'd like to use it. And I pull out the picture of Jerry Spence and I go, this is my friend and mentor, Jerry Spence. And when the prosecutor was asking Joe Slemko, how do you know this isn't expectorant blood? Well, and I tell him the story about Bill and I back at the office, and like, obviously, if you're an expert, you know what expectorant blood looks like. And I said, and Bill said, I tell him the story about like what happened there. And I say to the jury, that's like, you know, Bill said, that's like saying, Dan, how do you know it's not your dad? And me saying, I know my dad. Are you kidding? It's not my dad. Instead of saying that, you said, oh, well, my dad has gray hair, but he's short, it's shorter, and he doesn't wear a French coat, and he has a mustache. I said, people, if you're an expert, you know what expectorant blood looks like. And clearly, the person they call is no expert because, you know, he doesn't even know what it looks like. But then there was this book that Joe Slemko gave me called Blood Stain Dependent Analysis, which he was cited in for this research that he did. And it was awesome because when they're fucking little experts on the stand who has like 2 classes and like 80 hours of training, who is like an expert in explosives, fabrics, firearms, glass. I mean, this guy has got 8 areas of expertise. This is like their jack of all experts. Yeah. And when I talked to him that day, I said, what's your theory? Because he seemed like a nice enough guy. And he's like, I think it's expectorant blood. And at the time, it didn't hit me how ridiculous that theory was. But then through the book, I cross-examined. I'm like, now, all the things you would see in expectorant blood. And here's the funny part. This fucking loser, Guy Nutter, puts on this bullshit slideshow presentation for the jury. And it was so fucking funny because like, when we were preparing for closing arguments, I'm like, we need a picture of expectorant blood to show them how ridiculous this is. Well, sorry, that's upside down. And this guy like takes pictures out of a book. And he's educating the jury with this slideshow about what expectorant blood is. I'm like, see, ladies and gentlemen, this is expectorant blood. Because you can see the air bubbles in the blood. That's how you know. You can see the saliva lines in expectorant blood. That's how you know. Even these poorly resoluted photos they took out of a book. The guy took photos out of a book to show the jury of what expectorant blood looks like. I'm like, and so I go through this whole analysis. If there's no air bubbles, if there's no saliva lines, you know, and because I cross-examined on this. But you have to read the autopsy report. Here's right here. So I go through all these things. At times, at times these patterns can mislead an inexperienced analyst. I'm like, that's true. And then oftentimes it's less vivid coloration. We didn't see that. So I go through this whole thing. But it says, if however, no evidence of blood is found in the airway, either at the scene or during autopsy, expanded blood can be excluded as a source for this pattern. And Joe, in the autopsy, it says that there was some medical term that I can't remember, but it basically meant in plain English that circulation had stopped and blood had pooled in the lungs, in the bottom lungs as a result of that. And I asked the expert that. I said, do you read the autopsy report? He's like, yeah. I'm like, do you know what that means? The words? And he goes, no. And I go, doesn't it mean that after circulation has stopped, that the blood has pooled in the bottom of the lungs? He goes, yeah. I'm like, oh, so, now you know what it means. So now we know it couldn't be expected blood, so I crossed that off. And so it had to be impact spatter, so the bullet had to come from the driver's side window.